In a world where the climate is changing so fast, one of the biggest challenges for scientists is figuring out where animals and plants are going to live. Not just today, but, tomorrow. It's this massive puzzle with incredibly high stakes, and for years, we've had this special tool to try and solve it. But what if we've been reading the instructions all wrong?
I mean, this is the question, right? Answering it is absolutely crucial for everything, from preventing extinctions to protecting our own food and water supplies. And to get a peek into the future, ecologists rely on this fascinating tool called a bioclimatic envelope model.
Okay, so think of this model as a kind of climate detective. It starts by looking at all the places a species is known to live. Could be a butterfly, could be a giant redwood tree, doesn't matter. Then it takes those locations and cross-references them with super detailed climate data, like temperature, rainfall, all that good stuff. From this, it builds a profile, an envelope of the exact climatic conditions that species seems to love. It's basically its environmental comfort zone.
So what makes this bioclimatic envelope so powerful? Let's take a quick look at why these models have become one of the most widely used tools in all of modern ecology.
The applications are just incredibly diverse. Scientists use them to predict how climate change might shrink a species' habitat, or to forecast the spread of an invasive species that we really don't want around. They can even map the risk of animal-borne diseases. Oh, and they can also point researchers toward completely unsurveyed areas where a super rare population might just be hiding out. It's a vital tool for conservation, for sure.
But here's the twist. Of course, there's a twist. Despite being so widely used, these models are at the heart of a really fierce debate. Critics argue they're fundamentally flawed, and the whole disagreement really boils down to two major points. First up, critics argue that the models are built on some pretty unrealistic assumptions about how nature actually works. Skeptics basically say that to even build these models, you have to pretend you're in a perfect world that, well, just doesn't exist. So let's look at the two biggest assumptions they really take issue with. So the first one is this equilibrium assumption. This basically assumes a species is already living in all the places where the climate is just right for it. Now, critics say that's obviously not true. A giant mountain range could be blocking a species from a perfectly good habitat next door. But here's the nuance. The scientists using these models, they know this. It's what they call a working assumption. The point isn't to map some perfect theoretical world, but to model the realized observable conditions where we actually find the species today. Barriers, competitors, and all.
Okay, the second big assumption is something called niche conservatism. It's the idea that a species' climate needs don't really evolve or change over time. But again, the nuance is key. The model assumes the fundamental niche is stable. We're talking its absolute physiological limits, like the temperature at which a plant cells freezes. It doesn't assume the species can't adapt to live in a slightly warmer or drier part within that fundamental range. So here's the crucial takeaway on this first point of contention. These assumptions aren't meant to be perfect descriptions of reality. They're necessary simplifications. The kind you have to make to build any kind of model, whether it's for ecology or economics. The key is understanding what these assumptions mean, not just dismissing the whole model because of them.
All right, that was the first major criticism. The second one is much more direct. It's the idea that the models are just plain wrong, that their predictions don't match reality.
The argument goes something like this. A model predicts that a certain bird should be able to live in a particular forest. So biologists go there and nothing. No birds. The model seems to be contradicted by cold, hard evidence on the ground. But to understand what's really happening here, we need to look at how these models are actually evaluated.
Okay, now don't let the chart scare you. It's pretty simple. When a model predicts a species will be somewhere and we go and find out it's not, that's called an error of commission. And this right here, this is the exact type of error that critics point to as proof that the models have failed. But is it really an error?
So let's ask that question directly, shall we? If the model predicts a suitable habitat, but we go out and survey the area and the species isn't there, does that mean the model is broken?
Well, not necessarily. The first and simplest reason is that our real-world data might just be incomplete. The species could actually be there, but maybe it's super rare or really good at hiding, and we just haven't found it yet. In that case, the model correctly identified a suitable spot, but our survey missed it. The model is right, our observation data is incomplete.
Now, the second reason is even more profound. The model might be perfectly right about the climate being suitable, but it's incomplete because it's not designed to account for everything else.
Maybe that habitat is on an island the species could never get to, or maybe a really dominant competitor species is already living there, keeping it out. The model did its job. It found a climatically suitable area. The rest of the story is up to other factors.
And this right here brilliantly illustrates the core of the defense. As the original research says, a mismatch isn't necessarily a failure. In fact, these so-called errors can be incredibly useful. They can point scientists toward other non-climatic forces, like those dispersal barriers or a tough competitor, that are really shaping where a species lives. The model is just testing one hypothesis: is the climate right?
So if the models aren't crystal balls, how do we actually use them correctly? Well, this is where their true value really begins to shine.
By understanding what the model is actually showing us, which is potential climate suitability, we can do some amazing things. We can use those errors of commission to guide expeditions to discover totally new populations. We can identify future climate refuges to prioritize for conservation. If we're reintroducing an endangered species, we can find areas where the climate is perfect, even if the species isn't there now. And we can get a vital heads up on where a destructive invasive species has the potential to spread, if we don't stop it first.
So what's the big takeaway from all this? Well, it all comes down to a really simple but absolutely crucial distinction. The models themselves aren't inherently flawed. The problem so often is a flawed understanding of what they're designed to do. They don't predict the exact occupied distribution of a species. They predict the geography of potential. They reveal where a species could live based on the climate, not necessarily where it does live. They show us potential, not destiny. Ultimately, any scientific model is like a map. And you know the old saying, the map is not the territory. It's a simplified representation designed to help us navigate. So the most important question we can ask isn't, is this model wrong? It's, are we reading the map correctly, and are we using it for the right journey?